Is this a kidnapping?
She did not break any rules. Instead, she was targeted for advocating for the BDS divestment from Israel. So it's hard to see any daylight between this and Red Scare goon tactics, whereby someone exercising their First Amendment speech is targeted.
Hey, it's Jordan. I am in Flint, Michigan, East Palestine, Ohio, Tumwa, Iowa. Please support the only independent outlet on the ground covering what the corporate media covers up. Hey, it's Jordan with Status Coup. Happy to be joined by Daniel Buguslaw, investigative journalist with the American Prospect, among other entities. You went viral yesterday with a really horrifying footage of a Tufts University. She's a doctoral student. She has a student visa to be here, basically being, I don't know what you would call it other than abducted by ICE on the street. And the ICE agents were wearing masks and really kind of vague in identifying themselves. Let's play the clip that most people have seen, but if you haven't seen it, this is the video you obtained.
You guys covering your faces? You want to take those masks off? Is this a kidnapping? Yeah, you don't look like it. Why are you hiding your faces? Why are you hiding your faces? Can I see some faces here? How do I know this is the police? Seems like bullshit to me. Certainly looks like it.
So that's coming from a voice somewhere, but he's watching ICE with the Department of Homeland Security basically kidnapping this woman. Her name is Rameza Ozturk, 30 years old, Muslim, has a student visa to be here. She was at Tufts University. Can you tell us kind of what you know about the grounds for them detaining her? From what I know, she's now been moved to Louisiana, where Mahmoud Khalil and the Georgetown individual that they also detained was moved there too.
Yeah, I mean, you can see in the video, it's horrifying. You see these people with masks. It just looks like Gestapo shit. I mean, there's like nine or 10 people doing it. And my understanding, the justification for this is that the Secretary of State can determine which visas to revoke based on his personal opinion. My understanding of why she was targeted was that she was a prominent activist on Tufts University campus. But much like Khalil, was very thoughtful about the way that she engaged in activism. She did not break any rules. Instead, she was targeted for advocating for the BDS divestment from Israel. So it's hard to see any daylight between this and Red Scare goon tactics, whereby someone exercising their First Amendment speech is targeted because through some obscure law, they don't have the same protections as U.S. citizens. I mean, it's completely obscene. It's completely absurd. I saw, once I posted this video, even a lot of prominent voices on the right were saying that this is just absurd. I mean, it's a clear-cut violation of First Amendment rights. It's horrifying, and it's not supposed to be how America works. In terms of why this is happening, I understand that she was targeted by a activist group, the Canary Project, which attempts to target pro-Palestinian activists on college campus for harassment. Before the Trump administration, they were very prominent in trying to dox these people and release their names and destroy their livelihoods. And now they've found willing ears in the Trump administration who I understand have met with some of these Zionist activist organizations and essentially taken the lists from them and greenlit DHS and ICE to go after these people. So it's hard for me to imagine that this isn't going to go over the line. I mean, it's one thing when you have the Trump deportations from 2016, where average Americans see that someone has a different color skin than them and they feel some sort of divide. But in this case, it's extremely clear cut. These are students. These are people who look and talk the same way as your average, white American. And I think that visual and that understanding comes across clear as day when you watch those videos. And I'm not sure what the gain is going to be from the Trump administration. Certainly the rabid Zionists in the party and abroad are cheering these types of actions, but it seems like even normal conservative MAGA Republicans are starting to wonder how far this is going to go. And, if they come for these people, what's going to stop them from the Trump administration going through the books and finding some obscure 1800s law to come after them?
There's a lot of problematic things with this, but let's start with, they say, where are the police? Well, I mean, from what I could tell, they're in like plain clothes.
They're wearing Halloween store badges. Who the hell knows?
Yeah. So they say, where are the police? Actually, they're not. They're ICE. It's from the reporting. They're with the Department of Homeland Security, ICE, and they're also wearing masks, which I find quite ironic considering the right-wing hysteria about pro-Palestinian protesters wearing masks. So now you could have, misidentifying yourself as police, plain clothes, ICE, wearing masks. It seems like if you're going to be detained, whether you're an American citizen, someone here on a student visa, you should know who is detaining you. They should have to state the actual agency they are with. And I would say, dare me, show your faces.
Yeah, and you just see how pathetic these guys are. I mean, they can barely get their masks up. They're standing around. There's a dozen people arresting one PhD student. I mean, it's sickening. I would say go back and watch the video. Some of those guys don't get their masks up fast enough. And it might be possible to ID them and see who the hell they're working for. Are they police? Are they ICE? We don't know.
Mm-hmm. And, we've seen this obscure clause that they're citing, that the Secretary of State somehow has this power that I haven't seen. I'm not a constitutional scholar, but I don't know a loophole in the Constitution that nobody else could do this, but the Secretary of State has, full unilateral decision making to just decide who is supporting foreign terrorism. But they're saying that essentially Rubio can review any pro-Palestinian protester and decide if they were, quote, supporting Hamas. I mean, how does that really work?
Right. Well, right. And initially the idea that some of the wonk Beltway legal scholars were trying to vomit out was that, this material support clause, this idea that like these students were receiving funding or giving funding to Hamas. And that's been proved to be a complete fabrication and total lie. They also thought that Khalil was here on a student visa, and instead he has permanent resident status. So at every point, they've been groping in the dark to come up with some obscure legal justification to make their Zionist faction happy. And at every turn, it's being challenged in the courts. Again, I think that it's becoming apparent even to right-wing people that this is a gross violation of their rights. And whether it's now under the Trump administration or whether it's under another liberal administration, the bar is getting raised, the bar is rather getting lowered for what the feds can do to people who they don't like, for no other reason than the fact that they don't like them. So we'll see if these legal justifications stand up in court. These are very obscure old laws. I think you can imagine scenarios where someone's visa is revoked. For example, there was a lot of discussion around some of the most rabid right-wing factions of the Israeli parliament who had participated in settler violence that was against international law. Some of those people were told, you're not going to get a visa to come into our country because you are conducting physical actions and monetary contributions towards means that disrupt the Israeli-Palestinian peace process and create threats to the American national security. That is physical. Okay, that is violence. What we're talking about here is someone writing an op-ed in their student newspaper, a nonprofit backed by a foreign government targeting them, and then sending that information to the feds to have those people kicked out of the country. It's completely different situations, and I think that people see that clearly for what it is. There's no material support violation. There's no support for Hamas. There's a challenging of assumptions about America's relationship with a foreign entity that is draining our taxpayer coffers and dragging us into a four-way war that's making the rest of the world hate us. Right. I think that it is American to stand up and write about something that you think is harming the country that you're in.
And I want to read this part. This is from the Associated Press story on this. Quote, "It looked like a kidnapping," said Michael Mathis, a 32-year-old software engineer whose surveillance camera captured the arrest. "They approached her and started grabbing her with their faces covered. They're covering their faces. They're in unmarked vehicles." I mean, it kind of just reminds me of like a scene from The Departed or something, like one of these Irish mafia cases where they just snag the person, throw them in a van. I mean,
it's funny you bring up The Departed, because I was seeing people comment on it like the person in the video has this crazy Boston accent, and people were posting like "Come out, ye black and tans," the Irish song about the British coming and coming into northern Irish neighborhoods and kidnapping people and killing people. It's the same feeling. It's like federal occupation. It's like people try to go about their daily lives and the feds coming and kidnapping them off the street, not identifying themselves. So
right.
Yeah, I think that is a very apt comparison.
And my last question, I mean, this seems beyond a slippery slope. I mean, right now they're targeting, pro-Palestinian voices, but if they could just pick a topic that they say you're supporting Hamas, well, we've already seen efforts, even before Trump, for right-wing governors to call climate protesters, pipeline protesters, eco-terrorists, slap humongous, fines on them, or charge them with domestic terrorism. We saw protesters who were protesting what they called Cop City in Atlanta, that militarized police compound that was being plopped into protected forest. They charged dozens of folks with domestic terrorism. Folks were kept in jail for weeks. I mean, those were mostly American citizens, but it seems like from, trying to deport folks on student visas, the right always says, do it the right way. Well, they went ahead with the process. They did it legally. She's here legally. So it's kind of a mix of trying to go after, quote unquote foreigners that are opposing, the official government narrative or government approved policy, or going against American citizens and slapping them with felonies.
Yeah, I mean, and we saw this week there was a news report that the FBI has created a designated task force to look into Tesla terrorists, right. People who don't like Tesla. Personally, I think that Teslas are pieces of shit. I just saw that they had to recall 40,000 Cybertrucks because the glue they used wouldn't hold the fucking side panels on. I don't know if that makes me a terrorist, because I think they're terrible cars, but it seems like the FBI is starting to stroke their beards on that one. So I think, yeah, any place that there's dissent against the ruling regime, they're finding ways to take a hyper-localized incident, usually something protected by First Amendment rights, and blow it up into another one of these threat categories to entrap people, to try to separate them from their fellow citizens, and ultimately to prosecute them.
One more thing. Does this kind of have the potential to go to the Supreme Court, you think? Because obviously they're not stopping. They've targeted Mahmoud Khalil, the Georgetown, I think he was a professor. Now this young woman. It seems to me you're going to have, we would hope, if there is rule of law, you're going to have courts knock this down, then Trump administration going to appeal it and try to fast track it to the Supreme Court. It seems like they're basically trying to just do this illegally and then hope that their conservative Supreme Court will rubber stamp it.
Yeah, I think that's right. I also just think they're trying to do it's been reported on a bunch, but the flood the zone strategy. You throw as much shit up against the wall as you can, you see what sticks. You have enough of these different types of actions going, whether it's on immigration, whether it's on mass privatization, whether it's the Doge cuts, and you kind of just try to overwhelm things and see what you can get away with. You saw this with the deportation flights of Venezuelans to El Salvador, where Trump was trying to move as quickly as possible to create as much chaos and run and basically dare the courts to, before it gets to the Supreme Court, to do something. And in a sense, he was effective. I mean, I think the judge issued an order, while the plane was mid-flight, and they said that it was already over territorial waters. So I think it's really just trying to see how much you can do and get away with before it reaches the Supreme Court. And I think that the Supreme Court has kind of done some saber rattling. I think that the more moderate conservatives, especially Amy Coney Barrett, I've seen the right completely turn on her because she's proving to be somewhat of a backstop for SCOTUS decisions. John Roberts issued a warning about, threatening federal judges. So I do think that the Supreme Court does have some stopping power, but that stopping power only works when there's a case before it. And in the meantime, Trump is trying to just do as much crazy bullshit as possible.
That's a great way of putting it. As much crazy bullshit as possible. Thank you, Daniel Buguslaw. Everybody follow him on Twitter or X or whatever they're calling it. We'll put his link in the description. He got this really, if not for this footage, who the hell would know that this even happened? So thank you, Daniel Buguslaw, investigative journalist, The American Prospect, and several other outlets.
Thanks for having me.